A Strategy Simplified. We're continuing to start off season 11 of the podcast off strong with today's episode, which is brought to you by Bain, a fantastic economic consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. The firm has tons of really cool opportunities right now, especially for experienced hires. You can learn more about Bain at the link in the show notes. So for today's episode, get ready. Consulting candidates, we know it's go time. Many of you are in full-blown case prep mode, so well done for the hustle and for crushing it. In our mission to make consulting prep accessible for all, we're bringing you today's episode, which is a Bain private equity case interview example. That's right. Led by a former MBB consultant, Divya Agarwal, and featuring a brave volunteer from our community, which could be you. Apply to be a volunteer on a future live case, link in the show notes. But this case features a private equity firm looking to acquire a pizza chain. Listen in to see how the candidate drives to a final recommendation after solving the case. Did you know you can work with Divya via one-on-one case or fit interview coaching? That's right, she's a management consultant case coach, so you can grab an hour or two or more. Link in the show notes to learn more about her, get on her calendar. Finally, you'll find the charts and graphs from today's case linked in the show notes as well. So make sure to check out the show notes for all the good stuff from this episode. All right, we're gonna get right into the case after this quick message from Bain.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Korlowitz. I'm a senior consultant at Bain. We're located in Washington, D.C. And if you're not familiar with econ consulting, I'll kind of give just a quick overview. So we conduct analysis and research for complex real-world analytical problems and provide support for economic experts in litigation. Our clients are typically law firms, Fortune 500 companies, and government agencies, and they'll hire us to offer our economic analysis and expert testimony. So as an example, the DOJ might hire us to help evaluate a potential merger between two companies and the effects of that merger. Or we could be hired by a law firm to analyze the alleged anti-competitive behavior of a company and calculate resulting damages. So I've been at Bain for about a year and a half now, and prior to Bain, I actually worked in management consulting at Accenture. So I'm sure you've heard of both econ and management consulting. So just wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of highlighting the differences between the two, kind of my experiences in both, let you know kind of what we do at Bain. So in management consulting, the work I did was very strategy focused, and I worked with clients to develop new business strategies and created trainings for employees and prepare businesses for new technology implementations. And on a day-to-day level, this involved a lot of research and developing deliverables in Excel and PowerPoint, creating and tracking performance metrics, and then presenting those results to clients. Whereas an economic consultant, our work is a lot more heavily focused on the quant side. So I use data to apply economic concepts to real-world problems. Specifically, I'm in the antitrust practice at Bain, and my work has been primarily focused on price fixing and monopolization cases. However, we have multiple practices at Bain and do a lot of other work beyond just antitrust. And as I previously mentioned, economic consulting is much more heavily focused on the quant work. So I work with a lot of data in my cases using programming languages such as Stata and R to conduct economic analyses and build economic models. I've also used Databricks to tackle big data. So as an example, in a recent price fixing case that I worked on, I analyzed industry data to understand the economic impact of the alleged price fixing conduct on consumers and developed an economic model for the but-for world, basically asking what the economic landscape would have been but for this alleged conduct, and calculated the resulting damages. So while the quant work is a really big part of my role, it's not the only thing that I do. I also do a lot of industry research, analyzing documentary evidence, and performing economic writing for expert reports. So if you think you'd be a good fit for this type of work, you like the quant side, you love econ, I really encourage you to apply for one of our open positions. We're specifically hiring for experienced hiring positions right now. So that's experienced consultants and managers. So you can apply, info's on the screen on our website. And if you have any questions or want to learn more, feel free to reach out to the email that's listed here, careers@bainswhite.com, and we'll get back to you to answer any of your questions. So I hope to see some of you applying in the future, and thanks so much for your time.
This is going to be a case representative of Bain's approach. So Bain has been hired by a PE firm, private equity firm, to evaluate whether they should buy a mom and pop pizza chain that runs pizza restaurants primarily in college towns throughout the South. Let's call this pizza chain Gumby. The Gumby's owners are retiring and have put the business up for sale. Gumby has about 30 stores and annual revenues of $125 million. In order for the PE firm to want to buy the chain, they need to be able to double gross margin in 3 years. They're looking for 2 to 3 ideas of how to do that and would like to sell Gumby, this chain, in 3 years to another set of family owners. So I'd like you to start by just sketching out a framework for how you would tackle this problem. And as you do that, provide a hypothesis about which side of profitability, revenue or costs, you would like to focus on.
Okay. So if it's okay, I'm going to give a quick, brief context just to make sure we're on the same page.
Great.
We're basically working with a PE firm who's our client that really just want to evaluate whether this mom and pop pizza chain called Gumby, what their value is currently, and if it's possible to double their gross margin in 3 years and ultimately sell to another family. And so basically they want to evaluate this on either a profit, revenue, or cost standpoint. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I would say evaluate it on a profit standpoint since they're looking to grow gross margin.
Okay.
And what I'd be curious to hear from you as you're thinking about the cases, would you focus more on the revenue side or the cost side just to start as an initial hypothesis?
I understand. So just to start off, I do have a couple clarifying questions, if that's okay. Do we have a little more understanding as to why this PE firm is really interested in a pizza chain? Or do they have it in their portfolio?
Yeah, it's a good question. My instinct is they think that food is easy to franchise and grow quickly, and they may have a hypothesis that they have capabilities across other businesses to grow this fast.
Okay. And then in terms of just doubling the gross margin, and we have a timeline and, the benchmark there, but are they open to maybe expanding to more college towns, or is there a specific, avenue they would prefer in terms of growing their profit?
Let's assume no limit on scope.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
And then just for last clarification, college town, we're assuming just the US, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I think I have all the questions I need answered right now. Is it okay if I just take about 2 minutes or so to structure my approach and then we can go over it together?
Please.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Case frameworks trip up the most prepared candidates. Join the July 18th Frameworks Intensive for advanced case structuring help. This is a 3-hour frameworks masterclass where you'll become an expert on the 3 core frameworks, and you'll learn how to start blending frameworks to create your own. It's live teaching plus practical exercises and dedicated Q&A time. You don't want to miss this class. Grab a seat at the link in the show notes for just $100. This is the only frameworks intensive of 2023. There are just 50 total seats available. We sell out every year, so jump on this as soon as possible. All right, let's get back to the show.
Okay, I have a general approach that I'd like to go over with you.
Great.
So starting off, we know that the overall objective here is to really evaluate this mom and pop's pizza chain called Gumby. And so the PE firm really wants to see how we can maximize profits in order to double the gross margin in 3 years. So in order to do that, I've identified 3 specific questions that I'd like to dig deeper into. First one is looking at the profit standpoint itself and specifically how to grow its profit or maximize the margin. Secondly is to look at the PE firm in general and within their portfolio and, really figure out the logistics of how to evaluate this pizza chain shop. And then lastly, the third question is just looking in a greater standpoint of other considerations that could also affect the valuation of Gumby. So digging deeper into my first question of really wanting to grow our profit, it's looking at 2 specific components, both the revenue and the cost component. So within revenue, I really want to understand the current volume or the number of pizzas we're selling, what its average price point is, whether or not we have the opportunity to bring in new customers or ultimately retain old customers as well. And then I know it's a pizza shop, but usually they sell other foods like calzones or pasta. So whether or not there's the opportunity for us to expand our menu as well, that'll help bring in more revenue. On a second cost standpoint, I will really want to focus on both fixed and the variable costs. Fixed looking at maybe marketing or rent of the actual stores, because we know currently there are 30 stores, but what exactly the costs associated with those rent are. And then variable costs is looking at ingredients for the pizza, labor itself, utilities that change from store to store. And
so
then,
I'm going to pause for a moment, Toma, and just make sure I'm following. So if I go back to revenue, I heard 3 pieces. I heard the volume of pizza we're selling. I heard something around customers. I'll call that demand, like what of our customers can we get? And then I heard something about the product portfolio. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, sorry, I also put price in there, just like the average cost of the pizza.
Great.
Is it gourmet pizza? Is it, pizza that someone from a college town would be able to afford?
Okay.
So moving on to my second set of questions, looking further into the PE firm and, being able to get that valuation for them, I want to see whether or not there's any potential synergy that we may have if they currently believe that their portfolio, has some sort of food franchise in it. We might be able to bring that synergy in and then use that information to then logistically, create this deal that they can then sell the franchise 3 years later as their goal to another family.
Great.
And then lastly, even maybe calculate net present value for them or a PE valuation number so that we can see, we can quantify this valuation. And then on a last, just looking at it holistically, other considerations, maybe the competitors that are at this college town. I'm sure there are other pizza shops that are nearby. So what really makes Gumby stand out? Looking at the general market, the trends, the food preferences of the college students, and, are they going towards more healthy food or not? I think all of that will holistically help us determine the valuation of Gumby. So I think initially there is, I initially hypothesized there is room to grow within revenue. We can bring in greater revenue by, looking at the volume, the price, the demand itself. But I think if we're going to start off to really help our client, maybe digging deep into historical revenue values, if we have information on maybe the number of pizzas that are sold or at, each of the store, what prices are there or how many customers they have.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. So we do have some data, and I think I heard you mention the competitive landscape and the other considerations.
Okay.
So what kind of hypotheses do you have on the competitive landscape, just to start kind of brainstorm together?
Okay. So really who our competitors may be.
Yeah, any hypotheses you think about if you're evaluating the competitive landscape of the South, of the U.S.?
Yeah, so let's say in terms of competitor, right off the top of my head, I would think of maybe other mom and pop pizza chains. There's also, the big brand pizza chains like Domino's, Papa John's. But then we can also expand our competitors to non-pizza chain stores, so fast foods, McDonald's, or even casual fast food like Chipotle. So those are all, I think, competitors that we would need to look at, especially since we know that Gumby's is major in college towns. And so looking at the competitive landscape, maybe of one college town and kind of extrapolating what the competitive landscape would look like.
Okay, great. So I have some data on our competition that I'm going to show you. In a moment, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to ask that you just take a screen grab or screenshot, and then I'll stop sharing once you have the image. So I'm going to keep this question very broad. What can you draw from this exhibit?
Okay. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds to look through this.
Great.
Okay, so here we're basically just looking at the average market share by customer segment, and we're really categorizing between students, faculty, staff, and then town folks in this specific region, and we are just benchmarking Gumby's to other pizza shops like Papa Gino's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, as I mentioned previously.
Yep.
So just main takeaways here is that within the student demographic, we see that Gumby's definitely lead the market share at, I'm going to say that's 60% compared to its competitors. However, as we go towards adults, or older people outside of college, so faculty and town folks, it does seem like Gumby's lose its attraction. Whereas some of the other competitors like Pizza Hut or Domino's tends to take the lead. So what I can potentially do here is we see that students contribute to, or, students in general, equal up to 15 million. I want to say that's population, right? So 15 million students. So it seems like the market share, is 15 million. So if we're saying that about 60% of them are choosing Gumby's compared to 20% faculty and maybe 10% or 5% of town folks.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the 15 million, I'm going to have you hypothesize, is that population, or what is the metric on that?
15 million.
The 15 and the 6 and the 9, what does that represent?
Yeah, I initially thought it was price point, or just, monetary value.
What do you mean by monetary value?
Like, the market share itself is $15 million.
Okay.
For students, and then 6 million for faculty and 9 million for town folks.
Okay.
But I'm also leaning towards that it might be the population. So we have 15 million students versus 6 million faculty and 9 million town folks.
Okay.
If that's
I'm gonna say that your first instinct was right, since market share represents a revenue figure. It represents a dollar figure. Okay, great.
So in this case, we do see that students have the higher so the student segment has the highest revenue at 15 million compared to 6 and 9 for faculty and town folks. And then within that segment, we see that Gumby's definitely takes the lead compared to its competitors. So if we want to take the next steps, if we can maybe dig deeper into student segment, since that seems to be the most popular segment for Gumby's, and then either benchmark why they choose Gumby's over their competitors, if we want to get a survey, or we can dig deeper into the financial aspect and maybe see specifically how much Gumby's is selling to students.
Okay. What other data might you want to know to figure out where to play for Gumby?
Let's see. Some other potential data I think we might. So I already mentioned, specific revenue that Gumby's may be receiving from students alone, but some other metrics might be if we have a little more information on maybe the potential price points they're selling their products or their pizzas at. Even moving on to maybe costs, since we were looking at revenue already at 15 million.
Okay, great.
Just
Awesome. One thing I might be curious about is just the growth of the market across these segments.
okay.
So I'm going to show you one more graph,
Mhm.
and I'm going to have you do a similar exercise, both in terms of doing the screen grab and also sharing with me any hypotheses that you can draw.
Okay. Okay. So I see this second exhibit. I'm also going to just take a couple seconds to look through this.
Beautiful.
Okay, so looking at this second exhibit, we're basically, again, looking at the average market share by segment, and now our segments are categorized as delivery, carry-out, and dine-in. And that's, again, benchmarking Gumby's to their competitors. So main takeaway here is that Gumby definitely seems to be leading the market in terms of delivery, where they're at 40% compared to their competitors. However, it does seem like in dine-in category, they are slacking. So some potential things that we can look at is whether or not we can expand their dine-in capabilities so that we can raise revenues there, or we can continue to focus on delivery since they are leading in that category so that we can gain the market share for even further than that 40%.
Great. Anything else that you'd want to take away from this? Or that
I
you'd
do
want to
see that.
know? Sorry, or that you'd want to know.
Yeah, so previously we looked at just general, how Gumby's work with their segments of people versus now their, delivery services or like food services. I think next step may be to look at specifically if we can expand on their delivery, if we want to break that down into how to potentially increase their revenue in delivery. Either I know the overall goal here is to maximize profits. So since profits is a component of revenue and cost, even look at the cost component of delivering a single pizza. And
Great.
then seeing if there's ways that we can drop that or increase that margin so that Gumby's can grow their profit.
Great. So I'm going to take a bit of a step back with this question. So we've looked at the market share by customer segment, and we looked at market share by, I'll call it like modality of service, delivery, dine and carry out. What other information would you like to see to make a more refined decision on how to grow margin for this business?
Yeah, so we looked at customer before, we looked at modality. In terms of pizza, I think one of the most important things I would like to look at is potentially surveying what makes Gumby's, superior or competitive. So that could be either like a taste a survey looking at, their taste compared to other pizzas. It can also be what their product mix is, what I mentioned before. If they have, a wide range of menu where we can then expand on and, potentially bring in new customers. Even looking deeper into their, business model. So I know they have like the delivery, carry out, dine-in, but is there a potential way that we can bring in maybe loyalty or increase loyalty, and that would eventually bring in more profits or revenue?
Great.
So I think next steps, if we have information maybe on Gumby specifically and maybe customer surveys that we can take that can really hit home how Gumby's could be more popular than its competitors.
Yeah.
And then that can just be something that we can use to help grow revenue.
Cool. Well, unfortunately, we don't have customer, I'll call it satisfaction data. What we do have some information on margin for the modalities. And earlier I heard you mention that you'd like to see like what it costs to just deliver a pizza, right? Ultimately, what is the margin on these things we care about? Because in this business, we ultimately care about margin. So in a moment, I'm going to show you some profitability data, and I'm going to have you do the same thing as before, which is not only what conclusions could you draw, but I'm going to have you kind of do a pretty big synthesis exercise here, Toma, which is across all the data you've seen. What are 2 to 3 kind of crisp ideas you'd have for this PE firm for how they might double margin over the next 3 years? So let me first share the final 2 exhibits with you. And I'm going to ask you to do the screen grab once again. So just to recap my 2 questions, one is just kind of saying that we've been doing hypotheses you can drive from these 2 new exhibits, and then a broader synthesis of 2 to 3 ideas you'd give this PE firm to expand Gumby over the next 3 years to double margin.
Okay. So I'll just go ahead and take a couple seconds to digest the 2 exhibits that I have.
Please do.
Okay, so looking at Exhibit 3, now we're just hitting home the revenue by customer segment and product. So basically looking at students, faculty, staff, and town folks, but specifically their preference or what their revenue is going towards, either pizza, sandwiches, and drinks or others. So just looking at this specific exhibit, main takeaway is that within student customer segment, the most popular, I guess, product sold by Gumby's is pizza, really, which is as expected. But then they do have some sales coming in from sandwiches and drinks. Whereas when we move forward to faculty, staff, and town folks, it does seem like pizza revenue is going down. However, their sandwich revenue still is leading as the most popular product that is being sold. And then comparing that to the second exhibit, where we're now looking at profitability by products. And again, it's just looking at the margins between pizza, sandwiches, drinks, and others. It really does seem like pizza has the greatest drinks has the greatest margin at 53%. However, pizza, it follows slightly below that at 33%. And it seems like the most, the highest cost products within pizza is really the labor and the raw material. And that seems to be similar for the sandwiches and drinks as well. So one of the things that we can potentially look at is if we're expanding on the pizza product, how we can move forward in basically growing those margins so that ultimately we can double the gross in 3 years. So if I were to brainstorm some ways to expand, let's say, our margins. So right now we see pizza is so it seems like pizza itself is costing would that be $5? Or sorry, labor within pizza is costing $5, where a raw material is costing 10, if I'm looking at that properly.
Yeah, we can. I hear you on why you're trying to. It makes sense why you're trying to figure out the units here on the left-hand side of this chart. I'm going to ask you to ignore that and just focus on margins.
Okay. All right. So we're looking at that margin. We see that pizza is at 33%, where drinks at the highest margin is at 53%. So what we can potentially do is look at ways to increase the margins for pizza to similarly how we have for sandwiches and drinks.
Okay.
And one of the potential ways to do that is, since we see that raw material and labor is contributing to the cost most, one way to look at that is either we decrease labor or decrease the cost that's going towards labor. And then also if there's potential ways to decrease the cost of raw material as well.
Okay. So that I'm hearing as one very feasible idea over the next 3 years to increase margin.
Yeah, so to increase overall margins, I would say that two things that we can potentially do is decrease the cost going towards labor and decrease the cost going towards raw material.
Okay.
Another way to go about this, we do see that since drinks have the highest margin at 53%, maybe potentially sell more drinks. Since we see more margins there, we can potentially sell at higher volumes or maybe sell at a higher price where we can increase our profits and increase our profits and then ultimately help grow or double that gross margin goal that we have for 3 years.
Okay, great. Anything else? Any other ideas you'd want to offer?
Yeah. So it does seem like sandwiches here, it has lower costs going towards raw material and labor compared to pizza, and has very similar profit margins as pizza as well. So one of the things that we can potentially do expand the product mix within sandwiches itself so that we can attract more customers or bring in newer customers. And then that can also, help with the selling of pizza and sandwiches or their products in general to help ultimately double the gross margins.
Awesome. Okay, cool, Toma. I'm going to call it a close to the case.
Okay.
Take a deep breath. How do you feel?
We'll be right back after this quick message. Are you looking to break into consulting this year? In addition to continuing to listen to this podcast, there are a bunch of other ways you can engage with Management Consulted. Check out our website, themanagementconsulted.com. On there, one of the ways you'll find to engage with us is through Black Belt, our premium case prep program. In the program, you receive one-on-one mentorship and prep support from a former MBB consultant. They're there to guide you to offer success through developing a personalized plan for your prep and guiding you through drill-based coaching sessions. In addition, you'll receive expert resume and cover letter edits. Because let's be honest, case prep is only so good if you don't get the interview. 80% of Black Belts land offers, which is why it's the world's most effective consulting prep program. If you're ready to quit wasting time in your prep process, join today. The next cohort of Black Belt kicks off very soon with a group training session on the fundamentals of consulting recruiting, and spots are selling fast. Learn more and register. Check out the link in this episode's show notes.
I felt a little nervous. I was expecting more math. Maybe I was not doing the quantifying that I was supposed to do, but it felt a little more qualitative just because we had so many exhibits.
Yeah. Good noticing, and I want to make a disclaimer on this case just for the group in general. This is a Bain-style case. I'll be very open. My familiarity is much more in the interviewer-led McKinsey-style case. So I would say this, candidly, in my opinion, is not representative of, definitely not representative of a McKinsey case. It may be more representative of Bain cases. In every case, you will have a direct computational math question. You're right, Toma, that you didn't have one here. This was very exhibit heavy. In a typical case, I would expect question 1 is your structure question. Question 2 is maybe looking at data, but then doing a straight math calculation.
Yeah.
Question 3 will be like a data graph that has you draw some hypotheses. And then question 4 will be like a synthesis question to bring the case together.
Okay.
So, good observation. Anything you'd want to share before we do a little bit of reflection together?
No, I'd really just love to hear your thoughts. Actually, I was not really sure how to drive forward the case. I think that's what I struggled a little bit because I was getting the exhibits and it's just like where I'm going, trying to relate what I'm seeing at the exhibit in the market standpoint and then translating that over to financial.
Yeah. So what you're noting is both the beauty and challenge of an interviewee-led case. So BCG and Bain tend to be more interviewee-led. McKinsey is more interviewer-led. And I'm saying this for not just your benefit, but hopefully for the benefit of the folks on the call. In a case like this where it's interviewee-led, my guidance is at the end of every question, and this is where synthesis skill becomes really important, you almost want to have your 1 to 2 sentences that synthesize the what you've taken or what you've learned from that question and almost have a sentence to say, and to this point in the case, we talked about the 3 areas we would look at to evaluate how to grow Gumby. And what we've learned thus far is the following, because then you're actually driving the case forward and frankly allowing yourself to keep, I'll call it like the running party line of all the information that you're gathering. Because to your point, you're getting a lot of disparate data one by one, and it's hard to remember, what am I doing with all of this as I go along?
Yeah.
Versus in an interviewer-led, it'll be just much more I'll pull you along in a way that I didn't pull you along here. Okay, great. So let me start with a few reflections. I'll start with a recap. I loved your the 2 questions that you offered. One was, what is it about pizza that is interesting to this PE firm? Essentially asking the question, should we be playing in pizza or generally in food? And I liked your question on, are we limited by scope and geography? So I thought you had really good, not just clarifying questions, but questions that could move your answer forward, which is what I would call level 3 question. What I want you to be aware of, and this is hopefully a pretty easy fix, I tell all candidates, there's no need to be polite, meaning you don't need to say, is it okay that I'm going to do X, Y, Z? I expect you to take a moment. I expect all that. And I want to say time is your friend and your enemy in an interview. So the more that you can keep your language tight, the better. And so even simply saying statements, and I actually encourage candidates, I'm going to put these in the chat. I encourage candidates to have their go-to phrases that they just anchor on that they're going to say, whether it's, I'm going to recap what I heard, or I'm going to take a few moments and come back to you. And that's all you need to say. So it would be my only feedback on the recap. If it's okay with you, Toma, I'm actually going to jump to the exhibits first for feedback and then come back to structure, just because this is such an exhibit-heavy question. So in general, I'm going to encourage you and everyone on the call to think about the approach to exhibits at 3 levels. So one thing you did, Toma, that I really appreciated that I want everyone to do is take your 30 seconds to absorb the data and then do what you did, which is play back, literally just play back what the data graph is. So what this data is showing is market share, and I can even share my screen while I'm saying this, market share by, what this data is showing is essentially the revenues that we're making by the customer segments that we have across, 4 products: pizza, sandwiches, drinks, other. So just saying out loud what the data show without any insights, any hypotheses. That's level 1. Level 2 is drawing some takeaways like you did from the graph. So if this is what the graph is showing, we see that pizza, students by far are buying pizza. They have a few drinks to accompany. They maybe buy some sandwiches. What we see is for town folk, they're kind of a split between pizza and sandwiches, and faculty and staff is the same. So no surprise, younger people want pizza, older people want sandwiches and pizza. That's a level 2, which is just kind of I'll call it interpretation of the data. The level 3 is the distinguishing factor, right, for any candidate, which is what are hypotheses then, or like, why does this matter for our client? And this is where making connections, not just within a data graph, but across data graphs becomes important. So as an example in this case, and I'm not going to share the screen across the different exhibits because that might get just a bit jarring for folks on the call. A couple of insights along the graphs were just for Gumby, knowing that we primarily serve students really well and that students are the majority of the market. And that margin, like I think one of the other insights or just ahas was margin on drinks is high, great, but ultimately pizza's really where we really want to play. So I loved that you said, how can we basically get more margin out of pizza? What I want, I don't want to kind of prescribe a hypothesis that would have connected the few graphs, but one thing that just came to me when I was thinking about the graphs is essentially, how do we as Gumby double down on pizza, knowing that that's what we do really well and that our primary segment, students, is mostly eating pizza. Oh, and by the way, we also do delivery well. And so I can make an assumption that delivery and carry out probably have higher margins than sitting in, just because I don't need a lot of overhead to do delivery and carry out. And if I'm mostly serving students, they're not interested like an older couple is sitting in my restaurant. So essentially, if I'm a PE firm wanting to just like, pardon my capitalistic language of saying exploit profit, I essentially want to make pizza really cheap and get as much volume out as I can, which is essentially carry out or delivery. And I probably want to up my carry out because my margin is likely going to be higher there. And I think that's one thing I was hoping for earlier in the case, which is you wanting margin data much earlier. Because what was missing across all the exhibits until the end was any sort of cost view on any of this information. It was all top line. Let me pause there on exhibits for any questions from you, and then I'll jump to the structure, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
No, I think it makes sense. I think I got bogged down by the different exhibits, and I need to get in the habit of talking, but I should also be writing some of my key takeaways. And I think when we were going over it, I remembered, I forgot about delivery, which I realized I didn't even mention at the end.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I want to just honor the fact that looking at a lot of data like this is very fatiguing and just not that typical. So to the extent that, and this is more of a note-taking strategy, I'll say, to the extent that you can ensure that you have one piece of paper for each question and almost get in the habit of like a takeaway box at the bottom right of your piece of paper so that when you're looking at the case holistically, you've already done a bit of the synthesis for yourself. And as you're recapping what you've learned and then trying to draw that into like holistic insights at the end of the case, that'll just make your job easier. Okay. One shout out I want to give you on, I know I'm jumping around the questions because there was just a lot of kind of creative and exhibit questions. I liked your, just kind of the bigger ideas for data that you would want to see in general before we got to margins. So what makes Gumby superior for students? Like what are we doing well that we want to make sure we keep doing well and maybe exploit for other populations? What is the product mix and how can we expand this? That was a great question before you actually got some data on the product mix and margin. And then the business model, right? So what can we do to actually just get more money per customer, not necessarily per product, but actually per customer. So I liked that. Okay, so let's jump back to structure. A few things I'll say before I comment on your specific structure, and I'm conscious of our time. And so what I might do actually, Toma, is give my view on how to think about structure in general, not just Gumby specific. Mm-hmm. And then we can talk about some of your structure pieces if that's fine. So yeah, I'll say in general, we all know McKinsey is a bare minimum requirement for your structure. I like to think of structure at 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. So in your example, I like that you framed, there's a few questions I want to analyze. I'm going to call those your level 1s. So what is the profitability of Gumby generally? Your second level 1 was, the PE firm and like its portfolio. And your third level one was other considerations to do a proper evaluation of Gumby. That's level one. Within level one, there's going to be what I'll call level twos. And I encourage everyone to think about a level two as like a research or analysis question. And the reason that I encourage that is it will require you to actually think about what's the data that I need to ultimately care about what I care about in level one. So you said your first level two was revenue. So at that point, the research question is essentially what is the volume of pizza that I'm selling and at what price point? What does the customer demand look like today and what is the growth of that? I think I heard you say. And then finally, what is a product portfolio? That was my, I think, articulation, Toma, of what you said. When you did speak it, you kind of spoke it as one big sentence. The more that you can like signpost for your interviewer within revenue, here are the 3 questions I care about, boom, boom, and boom, the better. So that's level 2. I'm kind of mixing up level 2 and level 3 here. Level 3 for me is, again, this is what distinguishes a candidate, like a superstar candidate from a good candidate, is the more specific and like offering hypotheses you can, even within specific parts of your tree. So as an example, I like under your PE firm portfolio bucket, you talked about like what other synergies do we have? So for me, an explicit example of that would say, if we as a PE firm do we have experience just doing franchise or growing businesses in general, and more specifically, fast food type businesses where we know how to leverage talent really quickly. We know how to get the cheapest but high quality ingredients. We know how to optimize like capacity on the supply chain. Like giving really specific examples like that with regard to synergy would be what a level 3 examples are for something that's just called synergies. So level 1 is the bucket, level 2 is a research question, and then level 3 are specific examples relative to the client context. And Toma, I'm conscious I threw a lot of information at you, so thank you for bearing with that. Hopefully it was useful.
No. Thank you so much. Yeah, of course. I think that's what happens when you get through a case. You start losing a little bit of the structure if you're especially if you're bogged down by exhibits or like what you need to say next. And I think that's just something that I need to keep in the back of my mind. Like take time, take a breather, and then just kind of structure what I'm going to say.
Yes, always. Everyone has the right to time. I want to remind everyone that on the call. You always have a right to ask for 30 seconds.
Thank you for tuning into this fun case walkthrough. If you need help with your case interview prep, our team would love to help. Join our Black Belt Case Prep program for 8 hours of one-on-one case coaching. In addition, you get resume and cover letter edits, plus a whole slew of digital resources to supercharge your case prep. We want to see you set up for success, and we'd love to have you join Black Belt. Check out the link in the show notes for more information. Cheers.